Very good. Good morning, everyone. My name is Tim. I'm an alcoholic. I'm also a member of Al-Anon. Date of sobriety, 24th of July, 1993. So last time we squeezed step 4 into 1 hour or so. Today we're going to be expanding step 5, which is a fairly straightforward step to, well, we'll see how long it takes. I won't make it artificially longer than it needs to be. I'm just going to read from the book and then see what happens. Chapter 6, into action. That's made me think of something to start with. Very often people who are partway through the program will say, particularly during step 4, well, things aren't getting any better. I'm not improving. I feel just as awful, and perhaps I need that ominous phrase, outside help. If it says in chapter 6, into action, that means everything up to this point hasn't really been action. So no action has taken place yet. We've done some thinking, maybe, and some writing, but no real action. This is where the action starts. People often expect the results of the 12-step program from only having done part of it. It's like expecting part of Edinburgh when you've travelled only part of the way to Edinburgh. Like if you travel 50% of the way to Edinburgh, you've got 50% of Edinburgh available. You haven't, you've got 0% of Edinburgh available. Very important to remember. So one's got to complete the process. Having made our personal inventory, that's the step 4, what should we do about it? We've been trying to get a new attitude. I think that's important too. I was at a meeting yesterday where there was discussion of step 6 and 7, and in some cases it sounded as though everything's basically fine. I've just got a few details that need to be gotten rid of. And this is saying something quite different. We've been trying to get a new attitude. To what? To everything, which means the old attitude was wrong. To what? To everything. It's a completely new basis of life. A new relationship with our creator. As someone also said in the meeting yesterday, I'm rather sort of piggybacking on top of yesterday's meeting. But someone said about how, it all sounds very nice. This higher power business, that there's a lovely, it sounds lovely, a higher power, doesn't it? It sounds cozy. A God as we understand him, I'm in charge. Now suddenly we've got a completely different question. We've got the question of our creator. Oh dear, there's a little bit of bait and switch, it's called. Now, there are some non-English native speakers here, I know, so bait and switch won't be understood. Bait and switch is a marketing technique where you encourage someone to buy the product with something which is very nice, and then you switch the product for something else later on. Once you've decided to buy it, you discover that the product is not what you thought it was. So bait is encouraging someone to buy the product. Switch is when you switch the product. There's a bait and switch here. So no more higher power. It's now creative. Now, of course, if you don't like that, you're entitled to remain miserable and angry and objecting to these ideas. You don't have to believe anything. In fact, no, sometimes people in AA, they complain a lot about the program or their sponsor or this or that, or the meetings. No one has to be here. No one's forcing anyone. But this is what is on offer. When they say the program is suggested, it means it's offered. It doesn't mean you have to accept it, but it is what's on offer. The whole of my problem in step 4 that I've been talking about is that I have been in charge. My job on the planet, according to my ego, is to create an identity and an image for myself. So there's a very modern notion. I don't know if you've come across it. It's a technical term for it. It's called a career. The word wouldn't have been used in the 15th century. Did people do things? Yes, they absolutely did things, but they didn't have careers. A career is a very modern idea. It's about personal identity, taking charge. There's the phrase, a self-made man. And in American English, we don't say it in British English, but in American English, they'll say, oh, Bobby, he is worth $5 million. So the Americans think that people are commodities. They're things which you can buy and sell for amounts of money. They must believe that, or they wouldn't say Bobby is worth. They're not aware that people are people. They think they're commodities. This is saying something different, a new relationship with our creator. I didn't make me. I didn't ask to be here. I don't need to be here. What do I need to be here for? As someone said once, life is very time consuming and it's very bad value for money. I don't need to be here. But I am here. There must be a purpose, and the purpose isn't mine, and the purpose is none of my business, which is a relief, which means I don't need to work out what my purpose is. And that will free up the whole day. If I don't need to figure out what my purpose is, all I need to do is work out the next action to take. And it says to discover the obstacles in our path. There's only one obstacle in my path, and it's me. Specifically, my plans, my designs, my ideas about how you should behave and about what my life should look like as a result of your good behavior. We have admitted certain defects. We have ascertained in a rough way what the trouble is. We have put our finger on the weak items in our personal inventory. Now, these are about to be cast out. Well, that's a bit much, isn't it? I heard someone talk once at a meeting about managing their, I don't know, anxiety or depression, or learning to live with these things. That's not what this says. It says to be cast out. Cast, again, if you're not a native English speaker, means to throw. He's going to be thrown out. The whole attitude towards life is going to be thrown out. This requires action on our part, which, when completed, will mean that we have admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our defects. Now, this is very interesting. This is so interesting. Sometimes you only realize how interesting it is when you read it very slowly, word by word. First of all, there's action, and then there's the admission. The action is sharing the content of my step 4 in a summarized way. We're going to come to that later. And by doing that, automatically, I've done a second thing, which is to admit to God, to myself, and to another human being. In Al-Anon, there's although they don't define how you're supposed to do it, they do, some of the literature does suggest that you do step 5 3 times. The first time you admit your problems to yourself, secondly to God, and thirdly to another human being. As I say, it doesn't say how to do that. So to yourself, do you stand in a mirror and say it to your face? It doesn't give instructions, and it doesn't tell you how to admit it to God. It just says we admit it to. So in Al-Anon, they conflate the action and the admission into the same thing and require you to do it 3 times, or they suggest that. In AA, that was never the intention. You do one action, and in doing the action, it achieves 3 purposes: admission to oneself, admission to someone else, admission to God. Now, it's I think very interesting. Why does doing that mean admission to myself when I've already written it down? Because I'm reading out the words I have written down. I loathe this term for various reasons, mostly because it's sentimental, but it's useful here. The journey from the head to the heart. When I write the step 4, it has a degree of reality. But when I take step 5, the reality becomes real. It's no longer abstract. It's no longer theoretical. It's the difference between having a plane ticket and being on a plane. There is something about saying it to someone else which makes it more real for me than when I'm simply admitting it to myself on my own in a room. That seems to be inadequate. It's unclear why, but the fact is there. And one assumes that God is in the room already. And also the exact nature of our defects. That doesn't mean, sometimes people feel that they need to read out every word of their step 4 or they've missed something. In the St. Augustine prayer book, there is a section where it contains a list of human defects of character, and the list is 7 pages. It is a comprehensive list of all human defects of character. There is nothing that a person can do that is not accurately characterized in those 7 pages. And those 7 pages are 7 small pages. They're not large pages. They're sort of A5 or whatever the size is, half an A4. This means that if I've got more than 7 pages or so to read out in my step 5, I think I'm worse than the aggregate of humanity, that I've come up with more wrong with me than humanity has managed to come up with for itself. This means there's waffle. So waffle is meaningless words, or there's repetition. Each thing needs to be said once. If you've stolen something, if you've acted violently, whatever, you might need to give a good example. If you feel particularly ashamed of particular actions, you may need to quickly trot those out. But in 1 minute, you can admit a wrong in 5 seconds. If you've learned how to express yourself concisely, you can admit 20 wrongs in 1 minute, which means just even if you have 100 wrongs, 200 wrongs, you need to get off your chest and say. It doesn't need to be more than a few minutes. You don't need to be there for months or years. I tend to do step 4 with sponsees very thoroughly. I think it's better to do it once very thoroughly than to do it badly 4 times in a row. Very often, people have come to me who, and there's this terrible famous phrase, write this down and make sure you never say it. I've done the steps many times because the truth is one's usually started the steps but not done them thoroughly. If they're not done thoroughly, they're not done at all. Like if a journey is not completed, it's not completed at all. There's no value in half a journey. So to do step 4 very thoroughly puts me in a very good position to do a concise step 5 because I've understood the exact nature. This brings us to the 5th step in the program of recovery mentioned in the preceding chapter. This is perhaps difficult, especially discussing our defects with another person. We think we have done well enough in admitting these things to ourselves. There is doubt about that. In actual practice, we usually find a solitary self-appraisal insufficient. There's nothing so good for getting rid of an unpleasant behavior than to make amends for it. Because once you've made amends for it once, that acts as a major deterrent against doing it again. if one is in the habit of admitting the bad things one does again to a friend who is neither judgmental nor lenient, so someone who understands when something is wrong, that it is wrong. That's very powerful in helping me not do it again. Many of us thought it necessary to go much further. We will be more reconciled to discussing ourselves with another person when we see good reasons why we should do so. The best reason first. If we skip this vital step, we may not overcome drinking. There are several points in the big book where it says, if you do this, you will stay sober. If you don't do this, you will get drunk, or vice versa. If you do this, you'll get drunk. If you don't do this, you have a chance of staying sober. This is one of them. There are 7 things. When people slip, it's very common for there to be secrets. That's all. And also, the fact it's very clear here that there's I always complain about this, and I probably shouldn't do it, but I'm going to do it again. That this meeting where they say we came for the drinking, but we stayed for the thinking, as though the drinking is somehow a trivial matter, which now we've been in AA for 8 minutes has been fully dispensed with, and now we're on to a much more important matter, which is our thinking. This is not saying, it's saying no, the best reason is to stay sober. Time after time, newcomers have tried to keep to themselves certain facts about their lives. You see, this is not about moralizing against ourselves by wagging the finger. That's what moralizing is. The difference between simply observing a fact and moralizing is moralizing comes from a sort of angry, judgmental place as opposed to simply stating the facts. Time after time, newcomers have tried to keep to themselves certain facts about their lives, trying to avoid this humbling experience. Humility, I think I'm right in saying, comes from a Latin word meaning ground or soil. And humility is about being at ground level, not below it, buried, nor above it. Seeing the facts as they are, without exaggeration, without minimization, at ground level. There are 2 ways to get down to ground level. The first way to get down to ground level, if you are above it, if you're blown up, if you're inflated, the first way is to take the steps down to ground level. And this is the dignified way of going from above the ground to ground level. The less dignified way is humiliation. That's where you're pushed down the steps. This is very undignified. If one doesn't opt for humility, humiliation will do the job for you, but not when and how you expect it. Which is why the smart money is on humility, because you get to do it in your own way, in your own time, by taking responsibility, and you get to do it in a dignified way. Trying to avoid this humbling experience, they turn to easier methods. The easier method is not doing step 5. There we go, very simple. Almost invariably, they got drunk. Having persevered with the rest of the program, they wondered why they fell. We think the reason is that they never completed their house cleaning. They took inventory all right, but hung on to some of the worst items in stock. A friend of mine heard a chat step 5, and at the end of step 5, you tell the person, go and meditate for an hour, and with a pen and piece of paper, and identify, is there anything I've missed that needs to be revealed? And the bloke phoned back 45 minutes later and said, yes, there is one thing I've missed. And he said, what? He said, I owe so-and-so $315,000. There you go. He'd missed that. Very easy to miss. There are other extraordinary things as well. One comes across them where the thing which is the real problem is the only thing the person is not talking about. They only thought they had lost their egoism and fear. They only thought they had humbled themselves. But they had not learned enough of humility, fearlessness, and honesty in the sense we find it necessary until they told someone else all their life story. There's a swindler's game called the shell game, and it's where someone on the side of the street will have 3 shells, like seashells, or 3 cups, and they ask people which of the 3 shells or which of the 3 cups is the coin under, or the P, or the whatever it is. So there's one item hidden under one of 3 cups, and they move the cups around, and you've got to follow where the cup is, which has the coin under it. Then you point at one, they lift up that cup and go, ha ha, and then you discover you haven't correctly identified where the coin is, the shell game. The ego is rather like cockroaches. It hides in the dark. I used to live in Russia a very long time ago, which is a country just to the right of Poland. And when I lived there, there were lots and lots of cockroaches in kitchens. Cockroaches in kitchens. That should be a television show, shouldn't it? And whenever you open a drawer, the cockroaches scurry somewhere else. And then you open the place they've scurried to, and they scurry away from that back to the first place. They hide away from light. And the ego is like that. If I tell person A, if I tell Sally one half of my story, the ego hides in the other half and whispers to me when I get home, but if only Sally knew about that other stuff you didn't say. Then I go and tell Susan the second half, and the ego says, yes, but if Susan only knew the first half. It's only when someone has heard the headline, the full range of has read all the headlines, and they still treat me like an ordinary human being, that the ego has no evidence that I'm special and different and particularly bad. All the whole life story. Now, it's very important, I think, to read the book in context, or to read everything in context. In fact, things should not be read stripped of their context. Now, when it says until they told someone else all their life story, that doesn't mean every detail. It means the salient facts. If you look at the rest of this passage, 72 to 75 on step 5, very, very clear. It's a conversation. Maybe you can split it across to 2 sessions, but it's not every Sunday for a year. It's not 1,000 conversations. It's not literally every single thing that's ever happened to you, every single thing you've ever done. So sometimes people use that as justification for turning step 5 into the step 5 conversation into something more akin to an indefinite series of sessions with a psychotherapist. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's different than step 5. More than most people, the alcoholic leads a double life. If I could have kept it down to 2, I would have been fine. I remember seeing a psychotherapist when I was at 19, and she said, "Do you have any friends?" I thought it was a very impertinent question. I thought I'm going to answer it anyway. I said, "I have 5 groups of friends." I thought this was a perfectly normal thing to say. And she looked as though she was struggling with the concept of having one's friends automatically divided into 5 groups. Double life. No one knew about everyone else. I had different personalities in different places. None of them agreeable, but different personalities in different places. He is very much the actor. To the outer world, he presents as stage character. This is what we're going to be getting rid of, by the way. This is the one he likes his fellows to see. He wants to enjoy a certain reputation, but knows in his heart he doesn't deserve it. I was pursued my whole life with a sense of inadequacy and fraudulence, but at the same time, irreconcilable with that, the sense of my innate superiority to everyone else. The inconsistency is made worse by the things he does on his sprees. That's drunk and sober. I mean, they mean drunk, but I can be on sprees sober. You know, when you're at a group conscience meeting and you can hear words coming out of your face and you're thinking, I shouldn't be saying any of this, but it's happening anyway. Have you ever stormed out of anywhere? Or flounced out of anywhere? Standing on a tube platform having very loud arguments with someone you're in a close relationship with, should we say, with dozens of people watching, you know, that sort of thing. Sprees. And if you're a member of the S Fellowship, sprees takes on a whole new meaning as well. Coming to his senses, he is revolted at certain episodes he vaguely remembers. These memories are a nightmare. He trembles to think someone might have observed him. There's always someone watching. As fast as he can, he pushes these memories far inside himself. He hopes they will never see the light of day. He is under constant fear and tension. That makes for more drinking. Now, sometimes one might be aware of that fear and tension. Sometimes the fear and tension becomes so part of the way you simply are in the world, you don't even notice it's there. I know someone that drank after, this many years ago, drank after, I think, about 10 years. And he describes the feeling when the beer went down his gullet and the alcohol first started to hit. He said, why have I deprived myself of this for 10 years? It resolved a fear and tension he wasn't aware was there until it was treated with the alcohol. Psychologists are inclined to agree with us. We have spent thousands of dollars for examinations. We know but few instances where we have given these doctors a fair break. Now, would that weren't the case also in recovery. Very common. If you sponsor people, you'll identify with this. You know those films or cartoons where one character picks up another character, holds them upside down and shakes them, and then all the coins fall out of their pockets that they've stolen? Sometimes sponsoring people is like that. You have to hold them upside down and shake them before the truth has any chance of coming out. And you're trying to get, you know, some fact out of someone, and they give you riddles. You know, my first is in apple, but not in pear, that sort of thing, and you have to put the letters together one by one. It's very rare, in my experience, for people to tell the truth straight away in a simple way in AA. It takes very intensive interrogation usually. My sponsor said about me, rather unkindly, I thought. I didn't realize it was about me until ages later, and I thought the reason he was telling it to me was because he meant it was about me. He said, an honest person is someone who eventually tells the truth, which means there's a long, tedious period of lying. Very dull. We have seldom told them the whole truth. You see substitute sponsors in here. We have seldom told the sponsors the whole truth, nor have we followed their advice. Just walk around guiltily, full of excuses. You see, I've always thought that if I have a good excuse for not doing something, I don't have the consequences of not doing it. Like if I have a good excuse for not doing my step work, I won't then get the consequences of not doing it. I get the consequences of my actions, not my intentions. And the actions don't care why I take them. Unwilling to be honest with these sympathetic men, usually psychologists, usually more sympathetic than your sponsor. Unwilling to be honest with these sympathetic men, we were honest with no one else. You see, sponsors are not being paid so we can be as rude as we like. Whereas a psychologist, if they're too rude to someone, they won't come back and pay the bill. It's a very, very significant difference. I read it's been a huge, now it's not a benefit to some other people. Some people need a lot of love when they come to AA. I needed truth a lot more than I needed love. And if you gave the truth to me indirectly or subtly, I would miss it. Hell, I'd missed my own alcoholism and other addictions for years. It takes a lot to get my attention. And if you piss me off, you're going to get my attention. If you're nice to me, I'm not going to listen. I'm just enjoying how nice you are and not listening to the actual words. I mean, different people are different on this. A lot of people need a huge amount of kindness. For me, I'll miss the point. So there are different people, and that's fine. But it's the truth that gets my attention, and it's the truth that I need. Unwilling to be honest with these sympathetic men, we were honest with no one else. Small wonder many in the medical profession have a low opinion of alcoholics and their chance for recovery. We must be entirely honest with someone if we expect to live long or happily in this world. Rightly and naturally, we think well before we choose the person or persons, plural persons, with whom to take this intimate and confidential step. I came across the idea when I was 16 years sober, 15 years sober, of doing step 5 with more than one person. Paul Martin of Riverside, Chicago, Illinois, who died with over 60 years of sobriety, was, I think, the pioneer in this. It was his, or he was the one. He was part of a group where they did this, and he was the person who was chiefly responsible for propagating the idea of taking step 5 with more than one person. I find it enormously beneficial. Sometimes there remains shame after the first step 5. By the time I've shared the material with 2, 3, 4 people, it's gone. I need to share my step 5 until I'm bored of it, until and like chewing gum, if there's still flavor in it, it needs more chewing. You need to chew it until the flavor has gone out, and then chew it a little bit more, then you throw it away. And step 5 is like, keep chewing it with people until it's gone, until there's just nothing left to be gained from it. Then you're completely ready. Those of us belonging to a religious denomination which requires confession must, and of course will, want to go to the properly appointed authority whose duty it is to receive it. Though we have no religious connection, read that as if. There's a slight difference in the grammar between contemporary and 1930s English. Even though, or if we have no religious connection, we may still do well to talk with someone ordained by an established religion. I've done that. Was he ordained? I don't think he was necessarily ordained, but he was near enough. And I got a very helpful set of insights from that particular person. We often find such a person quick to see and understand our problem. Of course, we sometimes encounter people who do not understand alcoholics. If we cannot or would rather not do this, we search our acquaintance, in other words, our circle of people we know, for a closed-mouthed, understanding friend. Perhaps our doctor or psychologist will be the person. It may be one of our own family, but we cannot disclose anything to our wives or our parents which will hurt them and make them unhappy. 2 points. Firstly, this was written as part of a book which was to be sent out to people who are inquiring about the program in places where AA has not yet been established, which is why it doesn't say share it with your sponsor. They shared it with each other, but this is written for people. You see, sometimes people say you do exactly what's in the book. Well, no, because we're in a different situation. If you're in a fellowship, pick someone from the fellowship. Who it was written for is different than who it's written by. So some of this relates experiences of what they did. Some of it represents advice to people who are in a radically different position. So I share my step 5 with a sponsor and with other people who are familiar with this process because they've done it themselves. With ongoing step 5s over the years, again, I will only take a step 5. I've learned this from bitter experience. I will only take a step 5 with someone who regularly takes step 5 themselves. If they're not in a process of regularly taking step 5, someone who did step 5 once in 1984 and believes that they can survive perfectly well, not doing the first 9 steps ever again, but residing in 10, 11, and 12, simply does not understand someone that's doing a second step 5. They're in a different category. That's why it says it's so important to share this with someone who understands, an understanding friend. They can only understand if they're having the experience themselves. Trying to share a step 5, let's say a second step 5, or another step 5 as part of a batch with someone who doesn't do this, it very often produces negative feedback. People who regularly do step 5s themselves are much more compassionate about the fact of having to do it and the kinds of things which come up. And also, second point, if you are writing inventory and you have a problem, let's say a resentment with Sally, and you're examining your behavior towards Sally, Sally is not the person to discuss this with. If Sally's got a very close friend, Susie, and you've got a resentment against Susie, or you need to examine your behavior towards Susie, Sally is not the person because they're connected. Now, there are exceptions. The exception, this is to do with individual troubleshooting. Sometimes it can help to process something with someone who does know the person because they can shed light on the nature of the interaction. There can be useful insights, but one must be terribly careful with that. There are several ways of, if you want to torpedo, if you're planning to torpedo your relationship with your sponsor, here is an absolutely excellent way of doing it. What you do is you start to talk to your sponsor about all your resentments against your sponsor, all the things you don't like about them, about their home group, about their friends, about the suggestions they're offering you, how bad that makes you feel, and all of that. It's the quickest way to breach the good faith, which is the basis for a sponsorship relationship. So one must be terribly careful. If you have now you're going to have a problem with your sponsor, but deal with it with someone else. And if you still don't like your sponsor, go and find someone you do like. Don't put them through the pain of having you sighing and pulling faces and doing those, and communicating your displeasure in all sorts of ways. I found my own sponsor occasionally, I found things he said very, very difficult. Well, I said, thank you, I'll get back to you. And then I go and deal with it however I can, either on my own or with other people. But I don't bring my problem with my sponsor into my relationship with my sponsor. And it's the same with other things. I got advice 13 years ago from Jim W. of San Antonio in Texas, who said, in any relationship, if you have darkness in relationship to the other person, do not bring that darkness into the relationship with them and make it their problem to solve. My friend Edwina many years ago, not in recovery, but she said a very wise thing. She said, if you want to kill an intimate relationship, be honest. And what she meant by that is all of that neurosis is not the other person's business. All of your difficulties, all of your doubts, that's not the subject matter of the relationship. You have diplomatic channels with the other person, and it's through diplomatic channels that you solve problems. Because all of that stuff is not real, really. Well, of course, now she was being tongue-in-cheek. Of course, one must be honest, straightforward in one's dealings and so on. But there are lots of things which should be dealt with separately. Such parts of our story we tell to someone who will understand yet be unaffected. There's the danger of splitting between different people. So having more than one sponsor is almost invariably a disaster. Splitting the step 5 between different people is almost invariably a disaster. Find someone who can hear the whole thing. Occasionally there is justification for keeping an individual item separate, let's say because it's about that person. But usually it's possible to find a way of solving that. The danger is that there's no one who's heard everything. There should be at least one person who has heard everything. The rule is we must be hard on ourselves, but always considerate of others. Sometimes people in recovery say you have to be gentle with yourself. No, be hard on yourself. There you go. Nice and clear. Hard on yourself. Because surgery is painful. Lots of medical procedures are painful and they make things worse before they are better. It is not kind. If you had a child with a dislocated shoulder, it would not be kind to the child to say, no, we won't get the doctor to relocate, to reposition your whatever arm bone it is in the shoulder socket. We'll just let you suffer because we want to avoid you feeling the temporary pain of having your joint, the dislocation reduced. Lots of things in the short term are painful, but it's for a long-term benefit. So I'm hard on myself because what I'm being hard on really is my ego and my belief in my ego. The best thing for me, the higher self with the capital S, is to be hard on the lower self. The danger with being kind to yourself is you can end up being kind to the lower self, small s, at the cost of your higher self, capital S, and that's what's dangerous. Notwithstanding the great necessity for discussing ourselves with someone, it may be one is so situated that there is no suitable person available. Mercifully, with the millions of people in recovery, this is no longer the case. If that is so, this step may be postponed only, however, if we hold ourselves in complete readiness to go through with it at the first opportunity. It's a very curious thing. When I get sponsees to do step 5 they've shared the whole of the step 4 with me as we go along because we work on the step 4 together. I don't sort of send people to do the step 4 and then come back not having reviewed it. So they've heard everything. I've heard everything already. And I send them off to do step 5 with some other people. And I can't tell you how commonly people will say, well, I've made an appointment with Gerald, but he couldn't do it for a bit, so I'm doing that in September. I hope that's okay. Well, not really. Why don't you find someone that's available in May? and then you can get it done by the weekend. How about you just admit it to ourselves, another human being, and God. Basically, if they're a human being that is doing the same kind of program, they can hear this. It doesn't need to be a special person. It needs to be a human being. So I wouldn't delay with this. We say this because we're very anxious we talk to the right person. It is important that he be able to keep a confidence, that he fully understand and approve what we are driving at, that he will not try to change our plan. But we must not use this as a mere excuse to postpone. When we decide who is to hear our story, we waste no time. We have a written inventory and we are prepared for a long talk. We explain to our partner what we're about to do and why we have to do it. He should realize that we are engaged upon a life and death errand. Most people approached in this way will be glad to help. They will be honored by our confidence. The whole of this program is a life and death errand. And I'm happy as a sponsor to give my time to whoever needs it, but as long as they're treating it as a life and death errand. If there is the sense that things are being delayed simply because they're inconvenient, I'll say I'm not the right person to help you. And now we get to the actual instructions. We pocket our pride. Well, that's a little bit abstract. And go to it. We're going to get on with it. Illuminating, and this is the precise instruction, every twist of character, every dark cranny of the past. End of instructions. Illuminating every twist of character, every dark cranny of the past. Two subjects. Number one, twists of character. Number two, dark crannies of the past. What are twists of character? They're defects of character, also known as shortcomings. The book uses three terms: twists of character, defects of character, shortcomings. Are they different? No, they're the same thing. Bill liked to vary his language. It's a stylistic device. And so a good step 5 will list the defects of character and give a good example of each. Where do you get this list? Well, when I do step 4, there are 3 inventories. There's the resentment inventory, and then the add-on to that is the questions on page 67. There is the fear inventory, there is the sex inventory. The fear inventory is usually short already. The sex inventory, sometimes it's short, sometimes it's long. When it's long, there's a lot of repetition, so it can be summarized. The page 67 questions, which is really, you see that the inventory doesn't start until page 67. Step 4 starts on page 63. But the first 4 pages, the purpose of those first 4 pages, you're inventorying other people and how they're affecting you. You're not inventorying yourself yet. Why? You can't look at yourself unless you've gotten rid of the resentment that you have towards others. So the first 4 pages, 63 to 67, strictly speaking, they're part of step 4, but they're not part of the inventory. They're the preparation for the inventory to get rid of the resentment so that I'm in a position where I can look at myself honestly and squarely without any self-justification. So the real inventory starts with those 8 questions on page 67: mistakes, selfishness, self-seeking, dishonesty, fear, where was I to blame, what are my faults, what are my wrongs. 8 questions on who? The main people I've been writing about in resentment, the main relationships, plus any other areas of my life. I get people to summarize those questions across the whole inventory into a single sheet of paper. I actually get people to summarize the 3rd column of the resentment inventory as well, because that sets out what the demands are, what the ego's blueprint for the universe is. So you start with that, summary of the 3rd column, summary of the 4th column, fear inventory, summary of the sex inventory, 15 minutes on each, boom, you're done. The twists of character, are the defects of character. The dark crannies of the past are the specific concrete examples of where those defects have played out. If there are any other secrets which need to be told, that falls under the heading every dark cranny of the past. Sometimes people need to share in step 5. I certainly did. Things which had happened to me, but I felt very embarrassed and separate because of. So just get those out. Anything which constitutes a secret must come out. Once we've taken this step, withholding nothing, we are delighted. Well, maybe. Sometimes I felt delighted, sometimes I felt depressed. There we go. Eventually I'm delighted. It doesn't tell you about timing. We can look the world in the eye, because now you accuse me of something, I've already admitted it. You got anything else? No. Good. Shall we move on? We can be alone at perfect peace and ease. Our fears fall from us. We begin to feel the nearness of our Creator. We may have had certain spiritual beliefs, but now we begin to have a spiritual experience. The feeling that the drink problem has disappeared will often come strongly. We feel we are on the broad highway, hand in hand with the spirit of the universe. Returning home, we find a place where we can be quiet for an hour, carefully reviewing what we've done. We thank God from the bottom of our heart that we know him better. Taking this book down from our shelf, we turn to the page which contains the 12 steps, page 59. Carefully reading the first 5 proposals, the first 5 steps. Carefully reading the first 5 proposals, we ask if we have omitted anything, for we're building an arch through which we shall walk a free man, a free person at last. So I'm looking at the first 5 steps and say, very simply, is there anything I don't understand? Is there anything that I'm doubtful about? Is there anything I'm frightened of? Is there anything I've missed? Is the work solid so far? Are the stones properly in place? Have we skimped on the cement put into the foundation? Have we tried to make mortar without sand? So it's an elaborate image, but basically it all means the same thing. Is there anything I've missed? And once you've done that, and you've done it with enough people that you're now bored and ready for the next thing, you've done with step 5. So that's all I've got in terms of presentation on this. So let's move to, well, either we'll have questions or we won't. If anyone has any questions, you can either raise your virtual hand or you can write a message in the chat either to everyone or to me. Jules, and if you keep your questions fairly brief, that will be very helpful. And remember, you're being recorded as well. So Jules.
Now I'm being recorded. I'm not sure I want to say what I was going to say, but I will try and
Sorry, Jules, we're having trouble hearing you. So if you put your question in the chat, that's probably the best way to get it to us. We'll do it that way. Does anyone else have a question? Oh, how do you admit to? Okay, so I can see a question there. How do you admit to God? If you admit it to someone else, God is in the room and you don't need to do anything extra. It's automatically admitted to God. So you can take the pressure off there. Sometimes people invite God into the room as though God is sort of waiting outside the headmaster's office like a sort of naughty child and do come in, God. I think a better way of doing it is to acknowledge that God was already there and created you and the other person and, you know, avocados and mackerel and China and lots of other things as well. So the thing which created everything is already there. To acknowledge that that is there is a very helpful thing. Any other questions? Jason, you had one.
I don't have a question, Tim.
Oh, okay. So one from someone, what do you do when a sponsee wants to bring a resentment towards you, to you? You sprinkle them with holy water. Is what you do. No, you as soon as it starts to become apparent that they've got the jip with you, you stop it. Just stop talking. Go and deal with this with someone else. If I'm the thing is, I've had to say to people, if me sponsoring you is causing you so much pain, let's just call it a day. Find a sponsor who you're just really happy to be working with. I don't like being placed in a position where I feel that I sense that I'm forcing someone to do something they really are not enthusiastic about. And it's exactly the same thing with sighing, with silences, with all of the other behaviors which are there to communicate how unhappy people are with having to do the program, as they say it. I tend to just stop it right there and say, either be enthusiastic or go and find someone else, because it's not serving them to have a sponsor they're not enthusiastic to be in a relationship with, because it's depriving them from being in a relationship with a sponsor they are enthusiastic about. So it's selling them short, apart from placing me in a position where I'm the persecutor and they're the victim. There's very little from the domain of psychology I use directly as a model for understanding things, but the Karpman with a P, not Cartman as in South Park, Karpman, Karpman, drama triangle, is very helpful in understanding what is going on in certain situations where you've got a victim, a perpetrator, and a rescuer. And sometimes that structure, there are reasons why people like to activate that structure, and the role they give you as the sponsor is the persecutor with them as the victim. And you can feel it coming because you feel under attack and you don't know why. Why? There's usually Cartman drama triangle going on. Carolina.
Hi, team. Carolina, addict, recovering addict. I want to ask you, maybe you are going to explain it later, but if do you think it's better to have a short list of shortcomings or a huge list? Like, there are people that then they share, oh, I am very, very proudly, I have 142 shortcomings, so it is better to have like a 10 or, or like hundreds.
I think, okay, so I understand the question. The simple answer is keep the conversation to an hour. And at the end of the hour, you say, is there anything else major which hasn't been discussed? You can discuss an awful lot in an hour. You can read out an awful lot in an hour. So even if someone's got 100 character defects, you can read out the list of 100 character defects with an example. If each one takes, each one takes, 15, 20 seconds, name of the defect, simple example in a few words, you can get through a lot very quickly. So the important thing here is substance. Before I get to you, Samuel, I'm just going to catch up on the questions in the chat. How regularly do you recommend redoing the step 5 on an ongoing recovery journey? The periodicity I find useful is a quarterly review. What does this mean? It means I run through the first 9 steps. And now sometimes that's taken a long time, and sometimes I've done it in a day. The most recent time I took a long time over it. Once I've done that, I count 3 months from there. So I've got 3 months of plain sailing, just quietly living in 10, 11, and 12 and getting on with it. And then I revisit things again. Any less than that, if I've tried doing it yearly, too much builds up. I go too far off track, and it's certainly not necessary to do it more frequently than that. So someone asked, how can I help someone struggling to own their part in step 4, other than the fact that they retaliated to the harms caused in the resentment list? Yeah, if someone won't just tell the truth, you can't, there's not a lot you can do really, frankly. But here's the thing, if when I'm upset, I haven't got my own way. If I didn't have a way, I wouldn't be upset. Therefore, there is always self-seeking and there is always fear. If I'm resentful, my demands are either unrealistic or they're unreasonable. If they were both realistic and reasonable, they would be met. So you've got material for security, not security, you've got material for mistakes there. There are definitely mistakes. It's simply, yes, it's with the exception possibly of certain childhood things, it's just untrue that there's nothing there. When someone's ready to you see, this is why it's so important, this idea, this throwaway line on page 72. We have been trying to get a new attitude. If someone doesn't want the new attitude, there's nothing you can do. Maureen used to say to me, when I first did telephone service in London at the telephone office in 1994, I think I was around a year sober, she said, you don't need to worry. If they want it, you can't say anything wrong. If they don't want it, you can't say anything right. Next question, can you please elaborate something on resentment towards principles? Now, the book strictly does say you can resent, you write about people, which is straightforward, institutions, which is straightforward, but then principles. I've never found a successful way of writing inventory about principles. It gets too abstract. As soon as it gets abstract, you just start writing nonsense, frankly. You have to be very, very skilled to write about principles in a clear way, very skilled. And frankly, most people in the first few years, true of me, had trouble using language to say simple things clearly. So don't practice. I wouldn't worry about principles for a good 10, 15 years. What you can do, you see, if you've got a problem with a principle, usually you've got a problem with the people who espouse that principle. So let's say you're very, very upset with people who are very far on the left of politics, or you're very upset against people who are very on the far right, or maybe you upset with people who are in the center. Now, you could write about the principle, but why not write about the particular political figure who annoys you, or the person in the meeting who says X, Y, and Z? You'll get to clarity much better by doing that, in my experience, than trying to write about, you know, I'm resentful against marriage. Are you really? Or no, something happened. What happened? You might have turned it into a resentment against marriage. Oh, your ex-wife. Okay, let's talk about your ex-wife. Let's talk about that, and then we'll find out everything you believe about marriage. But start there. Start with the facts. What was the book with the 7 pages of defects you mentioned? It's on the blog, actually. St. Augustine prayer book. It's a little bit hard to get hold of sometimes. It may be available on Kindle these days. Samuel, thank you for waiting. What was your question?
Oh, thank you very much, Tim. My question is that, yeah, I did step 5, and I heard that a very important part also is this feedback from the other side, to which I'm telling that. And my question is maybe how to give good feedback when someone is telling me his step 5, because I'm a bit afraid of that.
Gosh, it's a very good question. Okay, so there are several questions within that, so I'll deal with each of those separately. When you're doing a step 5 with someone, make sure you get it clear with them in advance whether you want feedback or not. I don't think it's vital. It's very much down to where you are in your recovery. I think with some people, it's counterproductive. It causes the knowledge that they're going to get feedback stops them from telling the whole truth because they're frightened of what is going to come back. In my first step 5, I didn't really get anything back. and I didn't want anything back, and that was just fine. Today, I don't want feedback remotely, but I ask for it from my sponsor. I tend not to ask for it from my friends. If I'm doing it with a friend, it can be problematic, that, unless there's a specific thing I want input on. With giving feedback to someone else, unfortunately, it's one of those things where I think one acquires the authority to do that with time in AA. It's not something which is instant or automatic. I think one has to be a little bit careful. So no one is above anyone else in AA, but some people are further along. And the authority derives not from being above, but from being further along. If you're barely further along, do you have the authority to say something? You have to be very careful with that. You've got, I think, a lot of experience to be able to do that. What you can do, I think it's really a question of, I think it's a question of instinct. You ask God to guide you, but if you feel strong emotion in connection with what you're going to say, that might be your stuff and not theirs. Again, even that is not a hard and fast rule. Sometimes very strong emotion is a sign that you very much must say something. So to tread very, very carefully with that and to get clear with the other person whether they want your feedback. I've said to sponsees, even if you're sponsoring someone, I've said to sponsees during the step 5, do you want feedback? They said no. I said, absolutely fine. Woody.
Yeah, hi, Tim, Woody, alcoholic. I've got a question about this. At a certain point, you were talking about there are different kind of people regarding to sponsoring or getting directions. You said, for example, you needed a lot of direction. If you say gently to me, I missed the point.
Yeah.
If you're where did you know that right from the start from your recovery, or because I'm maybe struggling a little bit of determining what I exactly need from a sponsor. How do you know that if you're a little bit insecure about that, because it's all changing when you're starting recovery, and is in step 4 and 5 also learning about yourself. So if I don't know, how did you know exactly? You said you were very clear. I need a lot of clear directions. How did you know that you need a lot of clear directions? Was that a gradual process, or did
yeah,
you do
I understand
something?
the question. Yeah. So my first 6 months in AA, between January and July 1993, I kept relapsing, and I surrounded myself with some very nice people, and they were lovely. There was one that would call me every morning at around 8 a.m. I didn't have to get out of bed. He called me. It was like having a hotel wake-up service. And he was so concerned with how I was, and it was lovely. Then I had another drink. On the 24th of July 1993, I caused some problems and I was arrested at lunchtime. And they released me from the cells, the police cells, at around 5:30. And I struggled up the high street, Notting Hill, and I came across someone who was heading to a nearby AA meeting, and I think I had the idea to go to that one, and we sat in his car outside the meeting, and I said, "Oh, sir, what did I do wrong? I was doing so well. I thought I was doing so well. Oh, I've drunk again." And he said, you've been doing so well. You've been doing so well with lots of different things. The only thing you haven't been doing well with is the not drinking part of the program. That bit of the program you suck at. And I thought, oh, that's true. And when I get hit by one of those truths, a number of things happen. Number one, I don't like it. Number two, it hurts. Number three, all of the hot air goes out of me, like popping a balloon. All of the words stop. There is simply nothing else to say. It's just true. And I'm relieved, and I can see a clear way forward. And I knew at that point that that conversation was worth more than months of someone calling me at 8 a.m. every day. Another time, I remember, and people who know me are familiar with this story, where I was struggling a few weeks sober, and I called an AA member, Maureen, on a Saturday night, and I said that I wouldn't be able to do a step 4 because I could communicate effectively only through the medium of poetry. And she said, horse shit. She said, you're a common or garden alcoholic. The Latin term is vulgaris vulgaris. There's nothing special about you. You are ordinary. You can tell the truth just like anyone else. Same sequence. I didn't like it. It was painful. The hot air went out of me. The words stopped. I had nothing to say to that because it was just true. And the way forward was clear. So, and I've had that experience endlessly. Talk, nothing is achieved. The one right thing, boom, I realize I've moved. A miracle in A Course in Miracles is a correct perception. And as an acquaintance of mine says, if you perceive anything correctly, it's a miracle. That's why they call it A Course in Miracles. It's a miracle if you see anything as it really is. And a miracle, in a practical sense, is a sudden shift from here to here. And I cross huge amounts of territory in a single move. So time and space, the rules of time and space are suspended. It's like you talk about something for months and nothing changes. You're going round and round and round in circles. You're not even going in circles. You're standing in the same place with lots of activity, but nothing is changing. Nothing is moving. And then something is said and boom, you're somewhere else entirely. That is a miracle. And once that has happened, you don't go back to the earlier stage. If you acquire the ability to discern when that has happened, that when you've learnt something so important in one moment that you tried to achieve for months through other means, that's someone to hold on to, because miracles are interpersonal in nature. They arise out of an interaction between two people. They don't happen on your own. If they do happen on your own, it's because you remember something that someone said, and whoop, you suddenly move from here to there. So they are always interpersonal. So the people that enable those miracles to take place, miracles are very, very uncomfortable. And that's a very good sign. Paolo, do you want to come in?
Yeah, thanks, Tim, for your service. I want to ask about the sex inventory. The questions: did we unjustifiably arouse jealousy, suspicion, or bitterness? I have kind of a trouble myself finding that in the relationships. Maybe if you could give an example or help me out. Thanks.
Okay, so good. There are two parts to that. There's the notion of arousing bitterness or jealousy. And the second part of that is unjustifiably. Some people are bitter and jealous, and they were bitter and jealous before you met. And no matter what you do, they're going to continue being bitter and jealous. The question is whether I acted in such a way as to make someone who wasn't bitter and jealous, bitter and jealous. The simple way to answer that question is put yourself in their shoes. Imagine you are having a relationship with you. What would you have felt? If you would have felt bitterness or jealousy, what was it that you did that would have caused that feeling? So simple identification. Any more questions? And if you develop some, then you can always ask them next time in about a month's time when we do step 6 and 7, which will be rather a thin talk, perhaps. So, so Jason, I think we're done. Do you want to close us out?
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Thanks, everyone. Yeah, just if you want to contact Tim, we posted his link to his blog a couple of times. If you want the recordings, they'll be in the WhatsApp group, or Tim's blog will have the recordings. 7th tradition, and that's about it. We'll meet again in about a month's time. And I'd like to ask Samuel to take us out with the Serenity Prayer, please. Thanks, everyone, for coming. Thanks, Tim.
Jason. God,
God,
I need the serenity,
grant me serenity
Serenity.
to accept the
things I cannot change,
courage
the
Courage
courage to change the things I can,
and
the
wisdom
wisdom to know the difference.
Keep coming
Thanks very
back.
much.
Work for you,
Thank you.
work it. Everyone.
Bye-bye.
Mind if you don't.
Thank you.
Bye, Tim. Bless you.
Thanks, Samuel.
Hi.
Thanks, Tim.
Hello.